So, welcome to the troubleshooting seminar. And I know I've had a couple of questions to start us off, but it is a conversation. There might be times where if I get a question in the chat box that I will group things together because, as we will find with most things, they're kind of tied together. So I am Kaja Herstad Carney. I am a vocal coach, singer-songwriter, festival director, music potato. I say you can use me for anything like potato. And I have had a background both as a performer, as a vocal nerd. I love training singers and artists and helping people find their voice and do the notes they hear in their heart and in their heads. That's what I like to call my my approach to singing teaching. I do a lot of teaching of singer-songwriters and creative artists. I work a lot with musical theatre singers and anybody who kind of, well, not anybody, but I tend to work more in the CCM, popular music, and all of those genres rather than in the classical. But I have singers who are classical performers who just want to work on general habilitation of the voice. So I've also really gotten into vocal acoustics and the science of the voice of late. And I really like working with sports psychology in music. I came also from a sports science background. I've been working kind of semi-pro as an athlete, so I have a lot of background from how the body works and how we can train it, which I like to transfer over to singing. Today I bit my tongue really hard at the back, and I'm working out how to pronounce it properly without making it be painful. So if I pronounce things more weird than normal, it's either because I have a Norwegian accent or because I have bit my tongue. So that's the introduction I will do for myself. And you can find out more on the website kajamusic.com if you want to, or ask me. I'm pretty approachable, and the Zoom webinar is really safe because I can't bite anyone. So the starting questions I've had already, which I think is something that we can all relate to, is how do you develop the high part of your voice without having to break into falsetto? So this is from a male singer who is feeling that, so it's Pompato, who feels that every time he's going into the high part of his range, he transition into a falsetto sound. And I think we can all relate to the qualms of going from one register in our voice to another. So I think that's a great question to start off with, because it's kind of not as easy to say, well, if you're a male, you just do this, because it could be different reasons to break into a falsetto type sound. And the vocal vocabulary, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are. Feel free to kind of put a little bit things in the chat box, or let me know. I know some of your names and faces from either the bass groups and other things there, but if you want to let me know more about your background, so I know what level I'm talking to, I would start with finding out whether there's any tension in the approach to the bridge. Is everybody familiar when I say bridge, bridging passaggio? Please feel free to. I'm going to explain it, and if you all think, well, actually that's something we're very familiar with, then I'll jump to the end of that question. But I think it's something that it might be a nice way of reframing different things there. So the passaggio, or the bridge, is what we call the area where we go from one registration of the voice to another. So what that means in more layman's term is where you might have a lower part of the voice to a higher part of the voice. What that means in even more geekier terminology could be that we are going from a fuller voice or a first mode of the voice to a different kind of gear or a different mode. And there's loads of ways of describing this. But what I would say the main part of my role as a singing teacher tends to be helping people get from one part of a voice to another. And for some, tends to be, especially younger female singers, they might feel really strong in their higher part of the register and then struggle getting power in the lower part of the range, whilst lower females and males tend to struggle bringing their bigger part of their voice upwards. Many of you might refer to chest voice and head voice, which are terminologies that are used quite often in the industry. However, I've kind of gone away from using them without doing inverted commas, and that is because they essentially describe a sound output. They describe sympathetic vibrations of where the voice is coming from. And quite often you might find a voice in the higher register that sounds like a chest voice without it being a falsetto. So if anything of that is confusing, don't worry, I will come back with it. Oh yeah, so we've got some best intensives, and there is a lead singer in a blues rock band and worship team leaders. Great. Okay, so we have both people who are singing teachers, we have people who are practitioners, professional performers. If there's any hobbyists in here, it would be great to know as well, just so I can add all the layman's. But if you don't put it and you just want to listen out, that's completely fine as well, because I might also add some of the layman's terms, because that might help the more the singing teachers and practitioners just hear a different way of describing the things we all know, if that makes sense. So the question, how do I get with what this particular singer has written, of the going into a more falsetto sound, which my definition, which is based more on the kind of a still / bel canto definition, is that we're in a kind of lighter sound, and you hear it more as in a male voice than you will hear it in a female voice, because often that's a bit of a different timbre quality. And it will generally, a full head voice doesn't necessarily sound airy, but a falsetto will always sound airy. So that has a tendency to then say, well, either the vocal fold has been disconnected, so we've lost compression of the vocal folds. And that tends to be in male singers around an E flat, a strong guesstimation, because obviously without hearing it, we can't say 100%. And also, let's face it, unless we have a HD camera up our nose to look at the throat, electrodes, and a spectrogram of the acoustic output of the voice, we can't say 100% that's what's going on in the voice. But what we can is we can do educated guesses or estimations of how we think the voice is functioning, and that gets easier to hear the more we listen to people. So I would say a male singer who's trying to build their higher voice to sound less airy, less like a falsetto, is generally because they're holding on to their chest voice or their lower part, or for those of you who are that way inclined, the kind of thyroarytenoid dominance of vocal production. So we're ending up with a heavier voice, which means that we're struggling to hand over to the type of muscles who stretch the vocal folds to create a higher pitch. Because for those of you who are not the voice science inducted yet, there are no high notes, or there are no low notes. We just hear them as high and low pitches, but they're only fast vibrations and slow vibrations of the vocal folds. So the voice in general is created by these three components. You've got the power, which comes from the airflow, which is all of our respiration muscle. I love the fact, by the way, that respiration is called inspiration and expiration, because I love the fact that every time you take a breath in, you're actually getting inspiration. So that's the creative in me who likes that definition. And then you have power, and then you have the source, so the vocal folds vibrating, and a slow note will have slow vibrations. But it's so fast, even at the slow vibrations, that we have to use a scope, which takes loads of little pictures to see how fast they travel. We can look at some videos if people are interested in that. And then the final bit is the filter. And depending on how I shape my filter, depends on the acoustic output of my voice, of the sound. So a full voice higher up in the register could be created either by exchanging something acoustically. So if somebody gets a really thin voice up there, maybe just a drop of the larynx will help. While if somebody is really airy, you might need a bit more compression of the vocal folds. That's why we can't just say, well, everybody who struggles up high, it will be because of this. Because it could be a power, it could be a source, or it could be a filter issue, and filter being the resonators, and power being the lungs, the breathing apparatus, including the diaphragm. So I think I've answered that first question. At this point, it'd be great to hear any comments or further questions or about what I just explained or something else. I will just continue to talk because they put a penny on me, but please do feel free. Oh, I think, Sarah, you're talking, but you're muted. So
can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. So in terms of accessing the higher voice, what exercises would you use?
Right. So I am a massive fan of SOVT exercises for almost every problem, apart from the resonation part, but the power source interaction, there's so much you can do with a straw, so SOVT is, I know some of you will know this, but it's the semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, and it's basically a resistance exercise. So we're putting some resistance between the vocal folds and the world, so to speak. And I'm sure many of you would have done, or get my little straw out. The other, they are great, but with somebody who struggles with power up high because they are pulling up, then I would add a descending scale, because it means they can't kind of hoist up to it. And I would generally try and balance out with more air, because if we think that the voice is either too much muscle, too much air, which would be a simplified version of looking at the tension part of power source interaction, then if it's too much muscle, I would add air, and yes, it will be soft, but at least I would get it balanced. And then I try and work with that across. And like one of my favorite for male singers who's struggling around the bridge is the woof, because the woo lengthens the vocal tract. And if we're going to talk about like two of the most extreme acoustic strategies, is whoop whoop and hey. You can read loads more about acoustic strategies on both on iSing and also Voice Science Works. Ooh being a very long vocal tract, and then A being short vocal tract because the larynx is high and this face is small. So by using woof, 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 I'm kind of adding things forward, which helps usually to get into the registration of this resonation space, which generally tends to help us in the higher part of our voice. I don't know if we're going into formants and harmonics or anything like that, but let's not at the beginning. But essentially, we would go to a vowel that helps us into head voice resonance, and I add a f because that regulates airflow in case it was too much tension. So a woof, 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 and I would start it above the bridge, So you're essentially, this particular person was mentioning how the E flat was a particular place, which is very typical bridging area for a male voice. And we're talking then above the middle C.
So E flat 4.
Yeah.
E flat 4, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're familiar with the numbering, we just start at the bottom of the keyboard and move up. Then, around there is where a lot of males will start to struggle with negotiating whether they should be in chest voice or head voice. And starting on, say, the F sharp or a G, moving down an octave arpeggio and repeating it so that's basically a octave, fifth, third, root. By the way, if you don't know the music theory, don't worry about it. It's basically just this melody. Woof, 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 woof. And if you're getting balanced there, then we could add in something that's less heady. Woof, 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 for instance. But I wouldn't say that I do the same with all singers because it depends on the tendency. But that is definitely one of my favorite for a typical chest pulling man. That is not a euphemism. So there's another question come in there, which is exactly the opposite of how do you compress your vocal folds more. And so that in that way, we're not on too much air. We're on too little air. So we basically need to add more, basically more compression of the vocal folds. And there are loads of different reasons why we might need more compression, in the same way as it could be other reasons why we need with less. Some sounds could be adding like a bit of whimpery. So like if it's up high, I need to know from Martina whether we're talking like where in the register we're working and whether we're talking about female or male singers. Maybe is it a particular song, a particular vowel? But in general, if we're down low in the voice, I might use really wide vowels with kind of nasty sounds. So you're kind of nah, nah, nah kind of sounds to get into a compressed sound. Hard consonants help stop the airflow, while soft consonants help release the airflow. So the vowel, I'm overdoing them, choice will either stop the flow or release the air. The harder the consonant, the better they help in getting into a kind of more compressed sound. But if it's up high, that might cause too much tension. And if the reason why we went keeping the vocal folds together was because we were trying to keep it in these muscles that help keep the vocal folds slack and short. And short and slack vocal folds creates that kind of chest voice coordination. So there will be a point where they will try and reach, this is a very simplified version, we may go into a more geeky version of it, but this is kind of how I would explain it to students. So if we are in this TA dominance or this chest voice muscle dominance, your vocal folds tends to be short and compressed. But if we're moving up high, we want to include these other sets of muscles. There are other things going on, but we want to be in this dominance of the muscles that help stretch the vocal folds so that we can get a higher pitch. In the same way as if I grab my guitar, and the little string at the top, well, we're not tuned. Never mind. I can tune it by tensing the string, and a more tense string will have a higher pitch. But the thicker string can vibrate slower, and you can see the vibration, while the faster string can vibrate faster. And that causes a higher pitch. But on the guitar, I have two ways of increasing the pitch. I can either make more tension by making a shorter string, or I can make more tension by adding tension to the string. That will work up to a certain point, and then I might snap the string. We luckily can't snap the strings up here, although there are other things that could happen. But increasing tension to increase pitch in the voice will only work up to a certain point in the voice. And that depends what voice type you are. But there comes to a point where that strategy won't work and the vocal folds have to flip open. So on certain vowels in that muscle, I might end up with a kind of situation, which I'm sure has happened to many of us, and it's not always fun unless you wanted to do the I want to thank you, which can be a great effort, a great little effect. The short and tight strings, they aren't strings, the ligament, will basically be able to work up to a certain point, which is the passaggio. And then we have to hand over to this other set of muscles and make sure that we are handing over to this other mode, which is stretching out the vocal folds. And we might see this as head voice, but we may acoustically adjust things in the resonators to make it sound like we've stayed in chest voice. And that is a different reason how I would compress more in that mode. Because in that mode, I might add a little bit of cry. You hear that from especially a lot of pop singers and musical theater singers. And they, instead of that, I might add a bit of cry, for instance. So, I mean, I can do cry with other kind of acoustic, but the more longer, the more hollow the sound we get, and the more kind of wider, the more bratty the sound we get. And a lot of the acoustic strategy in pop and musical theater is that long hair and wide hair, or the trumpet strategy. So you get your right, you see the kind of belting strategy. And that can be one way of getting into more sound in head voice, basically. And you can definitely drag that one higher up than you can by trying to do your chest voice higher. Exercises, anything with wide vowels, if it is because you're lacking in compression, so you're kind of you know, if it's wide enough for the dentist, it's wide enough for compression, but not the kind of or anything hollow further. So, there's another question. Voice breaks. Oh yeah, they're fun. Not the person goes through with it. So 14-year-old boy, his voice has broken, but he will still be going through the change. It takes a long while for that to stabilize. And, you know, in the opera world, they wouldn't say you're anywhere. Well, I don't think we do either, but, you know, 25 or 30 might still be developing of the voice. But he might have gone through with the big shift from where the voice was different every day. He's still learning the how to play this new instrument. I am a songwriter, so I do speak in metaphors. Please let me know if this metaphor doesn't make sense to any one of you. But if you have learned to play a violin and then you learn to play the cello, strings and the distance will change because of the change of the instrument. Right. Some of his coordination will have changed with this new instrument. So even though his instrument might have fully grown into the male, I mean, most 14-year-olds have not fully grown into males when it comes to all the muscle development. Yeah. Some of them will. So there's the added element of their instruments. It's fluctuating with hormones and all of that. But in general, I wouldn't push him too far outside comfort zone in this part of his development, because let's face it, he's got a long way to go when it comes to his instrument settling. However, if he can get the coordination of the handover between this first mode and the second mode, or these different gears, if he can learn to go in a little bit earlier, either through these descending exercises and slides, and being really accurate on notes in the lead up to. So like, I mean, do you know if his larynx is stable, or if he kind of does the whole? Very typically, somebody who's just gone will be a little bit scared of letting go into the high range. Yeah.
Yeah, he tends to slide off the note at the end. He's not stable. No.
No. Okay.
No.
Are you aware whether his larynx position is consistent, or whether he has a tendency to go up for all the high notes and down for all the low notes?
To me, it sounds like he's going up and he's straining. So I try to make him sing with a lot of air, just to kind of
balance that out,
decompress it, and to balance it out. Yeah.
Have you tried any kind of really like sloppy kind of dopey exercises?
No, I haven't tried that.
So if somebody has a tendency to have a really high larynx on high notes, the likelihood is that they won't really hear that they're doing that or feel like they're doing it. So going kind of too far the other way can really help. So kind of playing around in that kind of
dopey
position to kind of counteract the larynx coming up.
Yeah, so like dopey door, but with like a 5-tone dopey door coming down, sort of thing. Do, 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 do.
You could try that. Again, I would see, like, I might start on a whoop whoop and just see if he can go to somewhere higher without tensing first. Also, language will be an important thing here, because a student cannot not think of something. So like if I say don't think of a pink elephant, what's going to happen? We're all going to think about pink elephants, and the likelihood of you thinking of pink elephants before the seminar is not very high. So it's kind of similar if I go don't be nervous, and if I say don't tense, we haven't given the body an actual task to do.
Yeah.
We're just focusing on what not to do, and that tends to like be kind of unhelpful. So if he's very aware that he's tensing, you're doing great for adding air. And if his larynx going very high, it's great to add the lower, but be a bit kind of mindful of how, like, don't do because with especially teenagers, there's so much other things going on of what they should or shouldn't do, and then some of them will get more rebellious if they're told not to do something, whilst the other ones will feel like lose their self-confidence if they do something they're not supposed to. So I'm a big fan of making them get the physical experience before they know what you're trying to get out of them. And if you can get that on the like a really, and like focus on that, doesn't matter whether they've hit the note, because they're not, we're just stretching a kind of idea. But like try and get the larynx down if you think that his larynx is coming up. In the same way as if the larynx was going really low. I call it like a double chin and the eyebrow singing, where if you see a lot of people doing that for the low notes, then it'll help maybe to think that the low note is high and the high note is low. Work on all singers, but it tends to work with a lot of those young boys who are still learning to play their new instrument.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Welcome. Any other kind of more specific questions, or to just continue talking about various things and how it all fits together? Are you shy, or are you just enjoying the conversation? Okay. Yeah. Well,
if you want to talk about performance, I'd love you to talk about performance.
Yeah. Right. So when it comes to performance, we might do a webinar later where we can go through kind of the science behind it, but I can do the bits that is easier to get your head around if you don't have any previous knowledge on performance, because I think it'll be better to go into into that with where we have a even layer playing field.
Yeah.
But what I would teach a student who comes in and don't know about formants, if it comes up, is to talk about resonances in our vocal tract. So a formant in a room is when something is buzzing, and you might have performed with somebody playing the snare drum, and then you sing this beautiful ballad, and then this snare drum starts going bzzz in the middle of one of those beautiful notes, right? That kind of thing is a formant. And in a room, a formant is generally a negative thing. So I know that when I'm teaching in the room over there, every time I hit the B flat, the lamp goes bzzz. Mm-hmm. Everybody kind of had an experience where something kind of buzzes when you hit it. So that is an acoustic boost, and in a space, that could be a negative because it's annoying. But in our vocal tract, it's the reason why you can pick up your phone and then call a friend or your mom or whatever, and they'll recognize your voice, because the bits that you boost with exactly your vowel choices. And I talked to a student earlier today who struggled saying thirsty because he wanted to say thirsty, because in Norway we have an and that's not really in the English language, and he has to do something for an audition, and we were going thirsty, oh tasty, no. And it's something in between, and he honestly didn't hear it, and we managed to kind of go, well, let's go and then go and we kind of found a vowel that we could buy in this audition song. And that is basically by boosting these different frequencies. And because we can boost different overtones in our vocal range because of the vowel choices that we make in our vocal tract. And what we essentially are doing, for those of you who are a little bit more advanced on the voice science, whenever we are modifying vowels, which I know that anybody who's had a singing lesson know that you might have gone from an a to an or something like that, and you've modified vowels.
Yeah.
That is essentially formant tuning. So if you read a science paper about formant tuning, you're essentially reading in the voice about vowel modification. So each vowel has frequencies that rings in the vocal tract when we do that specific vowel. But you could have a vowel here, and then you can paint that vowel with another vowel down here. And because the first formant occurs a little bit further to the back and the second formant occurs a bit further to the front, you're essentially tuning the difference between the first and the second. If that didn't make sense to you, what I mean is that you could essentially put a bit of a chest voice in your head voice and put a bit of head voice in your chest voice, for instance. Doing that by taking vowels that have a tendency to do more sound that we hear as head voice, and we want a lighter sound, we might be able to paint that sound with an undervowel. So if I'm going, I might go, well, that sound is a bit, and it wasn't really what I was going for. Then I might go, and you might still hear it as an E vowel. But the two different ones I did there, and I'll show you what this looks like. The two different vowels have very different acoustic output. And that actually ties into Tamara's question, which is how to make different notes sounds very tense and emotional, but they're not actually tensing. And that is a really good question, because again, it's one of those things that a lot of singers are working on and struggling with, is that idea of money, value for money singing. Are we talking about pop, rock, soul, R&B type singing here? Because that's going to be a slightly different answer. So Tamara, if you could confirm that we are talking about the CCM, I think, commercial contemporary music, or whether we're talking about slightly more, yeah. So that is that trumpet strategy I was talking about earlier, and they might use a bit of that cry strategy as well. So I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, I had a little whistle on there. Can you all see this screen with this piano and the? So
Yeah.
some will recognize this as the Voce Vista software. It doesn't matter if you don't, but if you know that down there is the lowest note on the piano, and up here, I didn't hit it, but yeah, up here is the highest note on the piano. And if you read music notation, you'll find the bass clef down here and the treble clef down here. If you know about bass, tenor, alto, soprano, you'll find them in these kind of areas. Okay? However, if I sing, I'm going to pick this note because it's nice and comfortable. Actually, I'll pick C because then we don't have to leave the key of C. And those of you who know music theory knows what I'm talking about. So, I'm going to sing this note for you. I was singing an A. That note that I was is this note here. Right. I was also singing this note, which is the octave above. And red means it had loads of energy. I'm also singing the fifth above here. So don't worry if you don't know the music theory, but you just hear the melody. So I'm also singing this note on top, and it also got loads of energy. And then I'm singing this note again, which is another octave. So essentially, when I'm singing this C, I'm singing 3 octaves above it, and I'm singing loads of smaller notes above that as well. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So you've got the note that you're singing, and then you've got overtones. And all acoustics kind of have that. If I take this water mug and go, I don't get much because there's loads of water left. If I smash this thing, I'll get a sound from it. But it's the filter, the resonation of the instrument that creates the sound of the voice. And it creates those overtone spectrum and makes that. So basically the smallest space I make inside my vocal track, now I'm taking my larynx up and I'm also creating a really small space inside my mouth. Even if I do the same note, you're gonna get a different. So I was doing I'm getting a really different sound. I hope you can hear that the sound was different. But why is it different? Because I'm boosting different energy. Look how much red is up here that wasn't here. So I'm boosting these high overtones so much. And I can go. So the trumpet strategy has a bit of what I still would refer to as twang in it, but it also has a lower vocal tract at the back. So if you're going, I've still maintained my twang region, which is up here. The twang region is up here. And that's, you heard that loads of twang in those 2000 hertz area there. And if I just, you can listen just to that. I wonder if you, do you hear the noise from my computer at this moment? If I do this, and I just play the twang, can you hear that now? So I didn't have much twang in that first one. Loads of twang. Can you hear that? And then above that, you have stuff that only sounds like. Crickets or something. but you hear the vowel E, right? I wasn't singing an E. Right. This is where it gets really weird, because I wasn't singing an E at all. I was singing this. But I'm boosting all the E frequencies in my vocal tract. There are the air frequencies there. The E frequency is this high one. And then I'll go down to the air. With the really resonant there. Go a bit further down. Can you hear all the different vowels and all the different notes that is in this one note? So yeah, twang, which is very, very common way of saying that kind of, well, that sound that we heard up here. This one's. And in CVT, for those of you who are familiar with the complete vocal technique, they even talk about the necessary twang of certain of their definitions, but don't worry if you haven't come from that side. So essentially, every time you sing, and I'm going to go from above there and just gradually introduce my voice again, and you hear that I'm singing the same note throughout. And this is the actual note. That's the actual note I'm singing. But on this one, I'm splattering the vowel and kind of going, ah. So I'm making a really small space at the back and a really small space at the front. Now, if I do the opposite and I do this, now I'm not boosting anything up here. Still the same note. So I'm going to try and do all of those again in a little bit of tighter. So you go. All of those can kind of be here as an A, right? Depending on if I'm saying and, or if I'm saying and, or if I'm saying bath. So that kind of versions of ah, right? And look how different they are in regards to the sound I'm getting. So I can create a really intense note without actually adding any more volume. But the more voice compression I have at the vocal fold level, the more access to overtones I get. And because of that, I can use the resonation spaces in my vocal tract to greater effect. Is that does that make sense? Oh, great! How do you create that compression without the throat tension? Yeah, I know that is one of the hardest things, and it's one of the things that you can actually learn through. I love the messa di voce exercise, where you are working on going from the quietest to the loudest to the quietest again. I like it through the straw because it's kind of really super safe. So if I use my straw, I'm just going from a, I'll do the same note again. That is an exercise that is great for developing dynamic range. However, when I said about the power, the source, and then the filter of your voice, so obviously now it's working all with the filter, there are so many things we do naturally with volume that we do unnaturally when we start singing, right? So do you ever have to, like if you're angry with someone, you go, I'm going to come over and be really loud at you. Like it's a product of the intention. So volume is a product of the intention. And quite often we will end up doing a loud noise when we don't think about volume, but try and reach somebody who's further away. So if we have somebody who's running into the street and I want to make sure they know that there's a car coming, I might go, hey, right? And sorry to wake you up there, where naturally my volume goes up. So a lot of that is natural. However, all of a sudden we think we got this high note coming up, so we're going, and all of these things happen. And quite a few of you will probably have talked about support, as in like body support, and we got to support that note, or anchoring, still, anchoring notes. Anchoring can be a way of getting or support two slightly different ways. And again, we could do an entire webinar on what support is, and that would be great to have a few different people, because I have not heard two different methodologies of singing explaining support in the same way. But if I'm going to say it's about involving the body. And for me, that's got all about the power source interaction. So the breath that we are sending through need to be in balance with the compression that we're looking for from the vocal folds. And it need to be in balance with where in the pitch frequency we are creating. So can I explain what the four mode, like edge, normal, etc. in CVT? I would love a panel where I have, because I've done courses in both CVT and still, but I haven't done the qualifications fully teaching to teach it. So what I can say is I can say what they talk about, but I wouldn't be neither allowed nor fully qualified to explain in detail what they mean. I have had sessions where I've asked people who are, does that mean a bit like blah, 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 blah? And I think some of the problem is the research is still so new that the methodologies are also working out 100%. But essentially, in my understanding, and as I said, disclaimer what I just said before, that's my understanding as somebody who's taken a view like that on all the methodologies, not like that. So I can give my understanding, but I cannot say and I think that's a really healthy, like in voice science in general, in science in general, we will say, oh, we believe that. And even the theory of gravity is a theory. But I'm pretty sure if I hold this here, it's going to fall. So there are some things that we can prove, but there's a reason why you say that's the exception to prove the point. Prove in science is you want to prove that it exists or that it doesn't. Okay, disclaimer over. So CVT talks about sound product, and they talk about neutral, and the closest synonyms I found for that would be that neutral is what I still would call speech quality. In general voice science, we talk about a neutral larynx, you can talk about neutral compression. So it just depends a little bit more if we mean all the neutrals or not. And I haven't seen enough of their research to know if that's their understanding of it. Whilst the curbing being the second gear, being slightly more cry in there, slightly edgier, edge, and then they kind of talk about overdrive as well, being like more the kind of like metal kind of that type of thing. But I'm still finding that confusing myself. There is not a synonym between CVT and EVT. There are two methodologies that have a lot of similarities because a lot of the research have come from the same place, but I don't think it's I don't think it's easy for any of the methodologies out there, and I've kind of been searching for the right methodology for years before going, you know what, I think it's really healthy to kind of work out what works for you, and don't believe that everything is like that or is like that. Does that make sense? So the way in the vocal folds vibe it, yes, it's got to do with compression of the vocal folds, but also which muscle groups, which muscle groups are most involved. And, you know, we might talk about, there's still discussions of whether tilting of the thyroids exist, and the some research suggests it does and some doesn't. So there's loads of muscles down there. And again, if we don't have loads of needles and a camera and a spectrogram like this to look at it all at the same time, we can't 100% say, because we can also get an acoustic feedback that means that we hear something is louder even when it isn't louder. And that is so confusing that even 6 years down the line, I'm still struggling to know 100% what this inertance, which is this acoustic feedback that we're getting, right? So if you just looked at this and went, whoa, remember I'm 6 years down the line and I still feel like a novice of some of this. But it's so exciting because I can go, oh, and I can go, I didn't really like that sound. Wait, what sound do I like in that part of my voice? Oh, I always sing great on, oh, that's the sound I want. Okay, so I can take my and put an oh at the back and I'm getting a different output. I'll show that on the spectrogram because that's kind of, so, oh, and I borrowed the ones that I like from that second one more over into the third one. I sang not quite as much volume on the first one there, but I definitely had more loads of energy through all three of them. Do you see that? Like it's ringing on all the frequencies, those three there, but it's just ringing a little bit less and a little bit more. So this middle one had a bit rounder, but if I wanted that emotional melodic thing that we were talking about with Tamara and Nelson as well, that kind of really loud, I'll move away a bit so it doesn't go. So I'll do the same note as that because it's kind of, actually, I'll be a bit braver and move higher up. I'm just going to plug in my computer so it doesn't die. So if I'm doing like the trumpet, so that's, you know, like a trumpet, shape of a trumpet, and then like a V on the top. So long in the throat and V on that. And I'll remove all of this so you can just look at that. So if I'm going, okay, so I'm gonna do it. This is the time, which is definitely where all the money notes kind of are for female voices in pop. right, all around that area. And I might want to sing it there. Nothing wrong with it, I guess. Depends what I want. Same note. And I was doing quite extreme strategy there. I forgot the whoop strategy. Look how much energy I have at the bottom one and the first one. I'm gonna overdo the so you really see. So in that first note I was singing, I'm getting so much. I'm kind of getting similar volume throughout, even on the one that was, can you see that? A bit more volume on this one. Not really much volume. I mean, that one I was distorting, so those of you who know about. But can you see how all those overtones are always on the same place? It's just a bit above that sounds different to all of them. Ah, great, yeah. So yeah, from Claire there. So yeah is easy to access on a bright sound, but it's hard to get sound anything but like a bit nasty, a bit bratty. And yeah, you know, all those yeah sounds, not saying that they're wrong. All of these could be useful strategies, right? My vocal training and like this kind of stuff in general, we're not really looking for you need more of this, you need more of that, because that depends on the artists. You know, some of the most exciting artists have got some really weird vowel choices. But if you get yeah and you wanted yeah, then that yeah strategy that I was doing first isn't gonna be so easy to access, right? Because, does that make sense? So the opposite of the yeah would be the whoop whoop. So if you can access the big notes on yeah, for instance, and you go between yeah, whoop whoop, yeah, whoop whoop, yeah, whoop whoop, and then C, just for the trumpet strategy, not the only strategy, just a very common one. If you can maintain the whoop whoop at the bottom and keep the yeah at the top. So I'm gonna go yeah, whoop, yeah, whoop, yeah. Could you hear that something changed in my sound? Yes. I'll move away so I'm not distorting. I'll remove this, and I go whoop whoop, yeah, yeah, whoop whoop, yeah, yeah, whoop whoop, yeah, yeah. And on the last two, I've maintained a lot of both strategies, and I'm getting a bigger sound. And this whoop strategy sounded like a head voice, didn't it? Great. Yeah, so it sounds like a head voice, but it sounds like a head voice, and the other one sounds more like a chest voice. But if you've got the two together, you might get one of those mix. And you can move that around a lot more than you can on a muscle belt, in which case I would need a yeah, which is louder, but it's more tense. I still did that on some songs, but you know, I couldn't do it for 25 shows a month. Okay, I'm gonna move away from the spectrogram and just double check that I've got all of the so I think I've heard from most of you. Annick, maybe, let's see with if there are anything that you kind of, even comments or any kind of okay, well, that's all well and good, but what does this and that person do, because they must be maybe an alien, because you might listen to somebody like Beyonce or Jeff Buckley or that guy from Kurdistan with the 5 octaves, or Layla Hathaway, or whoever you're listening to, and go, what? So it's kind of fun to look at and analyze, but the most important thing is to know that there is so much more, and the more I teach, the less I believe in talent. I gained almost an octave of full voice when I worked out how to do this mixing malarkey, or whatever you want to call it, because again, mix just as twang and as chest voice and head voice and curving and neutral and speech quality and sob, and all of these terminology are just some ways of describing how this wonderful instrument that we get to play with without even buying anything works. Okay, so that's that's kind of my philosophy of just finding out. And I'm saying the most talent comes from singers who are able to experiment with their voices. I think the most exciting singers to work with are the ones who aren't scared of experimenting. However, you could say that somebody like, you know what sound you're going to get from Dido or Ellie Goulding or Shakira. Yeah, although Shakira definitely has experimented a lot through her career, but like the sound she's most known for, did they get to that sound because it just came out and it just felt right, or did they mess around and experiment? That would have to speak to the individual vocalists. But I think sometimes, especially those of you who are either still finding your voice or working with singers who are, that idea of, if it isn't working and it hasn't been working 3 times, try and find a different ways to get to it, because that's going to be just as much a mental block as a physical block. And we can show them how to do a sit-up, but if they don't go home and do them regularly, that 6-pack isn't going to come anytime soon. So that's the same thing with the muscles and coordination and ligaments in the throat. And some of the muscles, you can see the work, and you can, effort isn't bad. Tension can be. We need necessary tension. We just don't want to be, we just don't want to have like excessive, that's the word I was looking for, excessive tension. How would, can I analyze different singers in Voce Vista? I can, absolutely. It's easier when they don't have a band behind them, because obviously then we can't isolate their voices. So if you have a particular a live track, it can be really fun to have a look at. And by the way, if there are free versions of spectrograms that you can kind of download and mess around with if you don't have this particular program. I'm not affiliated with that program in particular. It's just I had courses in that, so it's easier for me to use that. But there is also an app for free by Oxford Wave Research called the Spectrum Viewer. And when I go around and do like mobile lessons, I find it really cool to work, especially with the singers who get really, that doesn't sound right, and you've just managed a rhythm of all this tension, Or if your singing teacher, for those of you other performers, if your singing teacher go, yes, we're going towards the right thing there. Yeah, you're on the right way. And then you're like, but it didn't sound right. You know, like what I was doing earlier with the whoop whoop and the hey, it's that kind of woo doesn't sound right for me, but I'm using the muscle coordination that I was looking for more of. So like going between the two extremes. Can I analyze the different singers? Big Gaga fan. How would you describe her style? Well, that's definitely an artist who's messed around a lot with, you know, her vocal style and how she kind of messes around with the timbre and the use of, you know, so she might go you know, and next moment she's like, so she's really messing around with the way she's obviously overdoing it. But for sure, she. How would I? Well, we say avant-garde pop, don't we? But I'm not. I like making up genres, so I think that is probably the best description. Keeping the vocal folds together, I have a difficult time distinguishing between effort and tension, especially when getting into the passaggio and mixed range. Yeah, probably about 75% of us. Very hard to know. Are we, you know, especially when you're learning to go from, if your habit was that you used to do a lot of tension and you've moved towards getting a lighter coordination, then that can feel like proper knife edge. And it's so easy to go boom, back to old muscle memory. But the support muscles we need from the body, they are more like the, you know, like we have different muscle groups. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but some of the muscles are stabilizers in our body and some are activators. So the activators will be like doing activities, and others will be the reason why I can sit like this for a long time or stand or walk, like doing the more kind of make sure that my body hasn't suddenly gone over. And a lot of the body support we need to get the power source interaction, our supported note, is more the stabilizer than the activators. And if we involve too much of these kind of testosterone driven muscles, then the TA muscle, the thyroretinoid, and some of the other ones as well that kind of compress or bring the larynx up, a lot of them might be more of those type, so we're more likely to tense up. And so building from this coordinated and in will be easier for those people who come from that side. Whilst if you're somebody who has come from a lighter voice and maybe done loads of classical and more lighter singing and learning how to do a heavier sound, you'll be better off getting kind of the body more into it potentially. So again, that will be hard to say without hearing and seeing. Yeah, you know, if you can do it easily in the exercises, like your muscles are probably doing well. If your larynx is generally stable, unless you want to do it for stylistic reasons. I don't want to, you know, there's so many strategies that would be right to play around with different things. You know, you might have the meet me downstairs, you know, the kind of Amy Winehouse strategy would be maybe the opposite of what Christina Aguilera is doing. So it's not one right way. And then is it easier singing high note with an I or an A rather than an because everybody says it should be easy with an sound, but for me, going above the E5 with is quite difficult. So you're talking about the kind of exercise. Well, that depends on what your habit is and what your training has been. So if you've spent loads of time practicing up there on those vowels and consonants, then that's going to be easier. Also, if you are more in that kind of second mode, head voice muscles, even open up to different vowels will be easier. So yeah, so it's all about, so maybe you can move from the other way around. Maybe try a really whiny, so you're kind of getting up that way and more compressed, and then going up to an open vowel. I kind of like that as an exercise. Yeah. Oh, I find sometimes get compliment in a gig when I haven't felt I made an effort, and I realized that my real voice comes out when I do not push and you're relaxed. Strange feeling because it feels easy. Yeah, I think there's probably several in this group of people who will relate to that. And there's 3 elements I would say about that. One of them is the experience of the performance, the performer, of what is perfect can vary, even if you did the same thing at 3 different gigs, because that's your experience. And you might see somebody who sits and play on their phone on the front row, and you're like, oh, well, that didn't go very well. And your experience of the same performance was the next one. People are just giving you loads of feedback, and actually you might have been a bit off on some of those notes, but your experience were amazing. So there's that element of that. But if you've done the practice in the rehearsal and in the lessons and in the studying of the song, then by the time you get to performance, it should be, I wouldn't say easy, but just because something feels easy for you doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't really hard. You just happen to have trained the muscle and coordination and the stylistic understanding of that. And in the same way, you know, so many singers come in and they go, I want to sing this one because it's really hard. And it might not be hard for that other person in their class. And they go, oh, it's because I'm bad. No, it's because your voice has been conditioned to do this. So for practice, it's great to have those Mount Everest songs that you have to really train to get to. But for gigs, you want to pick the songs or the stylistic choices that sounds the best. And that might be stuff that's really hard for other people. The amount of time I have people who come in and they want to learn how to flip because they want to go, and then I have as many people who come in and go, I don't want my voice to go, you know. Sometimes those things that aren't correct makes the voice. So, and I say correct very much here because any sound that we make in natural life, this body has been made to make. So if it comes from the heart or the head, then there's likelihood to be a lot of right things. That said, the body doesn't know what has become a habit and what is natural. So sometimes by letting a student experience what it should feel like, then all of a sudden that feels natural too. And I think we're kind of coming up towards the end. So I'm going to do a round of final questions. Feel free to message it in here privately or say it out loud. But there's final question time. I'm getting thank yous. That's lovely. I know we went really super deep because of some of the earlier questions. So absolutely. If you feel that things are getting easier, that is because you're practicing right. So that is a very good observation. And if we can notice the reasons, sometimes when we get better, the better we get, the harder it is to get to the next level. You know, the plateaus between levels are going to be so, there's going to be so smaller breakthroughs than in the beginning. And getting feedback from other people and asking and listening back to because you might listen back to performances you did a few years back and go, oh yeah, I do sing that better, or pick material up that you did before and it's easier. So it's an ongoing thing, and you know the voice is a moving target. You might be too light, too heavy, too light, too heavy, and the more consistent our technique and our larynx and our coordination and our
acoustic knowledge or whatever else,
the easier we can, you know, be flexible as singers. Ah, you're all very nice. Thank you for so many lovely thank yous. That makes it much nicer to do a webinar. So thanks for geeking out with me tonight, and hopefully we'll cross paths in the future. If there are any question that comes up that you you can't think of, you know, answer, send them in, and I'll I'll reply in the future as well. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to iSingmag for making this possible. I love their magazine anyway, so it's always amazing to take part in. And yeah, keep looking out for other webinars and things that are happening, and we'll see you sometimes in the future. So you can contact me through iSingmag or through my website, which is kayamusic.com. That's Kaya. Thank you very much and good night. Bye.